Mixing the Colours is part of the government's Tackling Sectarianism programme. The women who participated responded to public calls for people to come forward to share their experiences and views on sectarianism, and we've been very conscious throughout the project to be sensitive to both Catholic and Protestant religions and cultural experiences. The women who did speak to us came along to workshops in their communities across Scotland with the recognition that they were not a homogenous group. We spoke with women from diverse ethnic, cultural backgrounds and women with disabilities, lesbian, bisexual and transgender women, which expands the concept of sectarianism out from direct experience of discrimination on the basis of Christian denomination to the widely felt tremors of intolerance that impact women's lives in a really complex and intersectional way.
My mother's sharp slap on the back of my legs as I danced to the band that stops the traffic all the way along the Barrhead Road, at least according to those who had to get off the 48 bus and walk. While the guy at the front waves his stick like a wand, my mum rages in the thunderclap air. "Don't you ever dance for them," she says. "They're protesting against the likes of us." I suppose in childhood it wasn't really something that I considered much until, there were a few incidents like the first one I mentioned where the Orange Walk came along the Barrhead Road one day and there were it was there was a slight carnival atmosphere, crowds everywhere, but I didn't know that it was because nobody could cross the road. And I remember starting to dance a bit to it, and there was lots of hissing and "don't do that," and I think there was even, as I said, a smack. And you started to wonder, you wondered a bit more about the world around you. And I think it was about 4, maybe even 5. I wasn't at school, but kind of old enough to think about the outside world a bit more. But in terms of family and things, I don't think I was ever taken to church, chapel as we called it. I don't think I was ever taken to chapel until I went to school. So I didn't really, or if I was too small to pay much attention. So I didn't really pay much attention to it until, as I say, there were a few incidents in early childhood, and then of course going to school where you had to watch which streets you walked down, going in the morning and hide your tie, and it was a bit of a game. It was always a bit of a kind of giggle, oh, watch out, there's proddies up there, and they'd be saying the same thing about us, watch they go, and there were always kids from both sides of the divide who were considered a bit fierce, and you didn't cross them.
Well, I was actually born in Northern Ireland, or North of Ireland, however you want to say it, and I didn't realise, we moved away when I was quite small, and my dad was actually in the Air Force, so that's why we were there, but I didn't realise the implications of where I was born until I was older. And I found myself here in Clydebank, which is a very Irish area, and lots of people have connections to Ireland, and I hear their stories a lot, and I've learnt a lot about myself, which is that my name Bradley is Irish, and when I've been over to Ireland, I've seen various firms and things called Bradley, and so I've got lots of questions about who I am really, and in terms of sectarianism I do notice it a lot. I notice it on TV, I notice it when it happens in Glasgow and around here sometimes, and I find it very upsetting and disturbing every single time, and I really do want very, very deeply for sectarianism to end and for the conflict in Ireland to end so that we can all live in peace.
Well, as I've been growing up in the area of Ibrox, since childhood I remember us not being allowed out to go on a match day. So when it was a match day, I remember actually going shopping with my mum just down to the local shops, and I do remember getting abuse called like a packy, this, that, the other, because I was wearing the cultural traditional schwarkamies. So ever since that experience, for some reason, it's always stuck in my head. So when there is a match, I do tend to avoid going out. I tend to say to family members as well, especially my sisters, my mum, don't go out, because it's just that kind of experience that's stuck. But like, I've stopped wearing schwarkamies. Like, I don't wear it in my area, I definitely wouldn't, especially on a match day. But since that day, I remember I refused to wear my traditional schwarkamies because I thought, oh no, I'm going to get abused. So throughout childhood, I just remember sitting at the window just watching them walk by, and drunken fights and stuff at night, especially when the pubs. It's not been a great experience, but I have to say nowadays it's not as bad as what it used to be back then.
My personal experience with my family, I didn't come across any sectarianism within our immediate family group. It was always outside. As a child growing up in the Gorbals, we had Irish Catholics, we had Jewish, we had the Suiciders, as we were called, which was the people who came from the south side, and then there was a real mix. And going to school was fine, Catholic school. Never, mum and dad weren't practicing Catholics, so I didn't have the cross in the wall, and my cousins were Protestants and they didn't have the Queen in the wall, so we just didn't think about it until at primary school. You got the rumours coming, don't go to the outside toilet because the Protestants will come and beat you up. And that would maybe be my first, as a childhood experience, of being frightened of Protestants. And I didn't know who they were. It was just this school that would come over and beat you up. They never did. It was rumours. Maybe what you would say, like the social media is now, word of mouth rumours. So that, when I was younger, really young. But as I grew up, and my father had shops over at Paisley Road West, Ibrox, we went to a completely different area, and it was predominantly Protestants, and all the pubs were all flags outside for Rangers, and you know, the Union Jacks. A wee bit like when I first came to the library and I walked down Bridgeton and I thought I was being back to the 70s, because that's what like it was. And we couldn't wear colours. That's when my dad started telling us, don't wear your cross, don't wear any colours. And also the orange walks all come down there. And when I was younger, I thought they were fun, but I saw a frightening side of them. And we'd close the shops, and we'd stand outside and we'd cheer them on, because my dad was called Billy. So when they passed the shops, they did that extra wee thinking, you know, Billy, you know, King Billy or whatever it was. So it was that was quite frightening. And they were frightening only when they were in the walks. When you saw them during the day, they were perfectly nice, but they sort of get this anger in them when you saw them at the walks. And that was my first experience of the bitterness between like the Protestant Catholics when I got older. And then we had the Asian community who came in to the area, and they were just lovely, but they must have came across quite a lot as well. And I don't know, you played with these kids. We had, you know, I worked with these people, but when these walks came, and I'm not blaming the Protestants, I'm blaming the Catholics as well. The sectarianism and all the sides was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
I was one of the ones at the told the flags, oh, here we go, oh, really bad, terrible. It was a video of me and Kelvin Grove Art Galleries, and it's all about sectarian issues, and it's a video of the orange walk, and there's this lassie walking down the street, and me and my man's filming watching it. Oh, there's the orange, wonder if we see anybody we know. And the next time this camera's following this lassie, and she's got this big flag on dancing about. My lassie comes round and aye, it's me. right there, right face to face in the video. And I'm like, oh my God, see when I think back, I used to be going like that, right, the Hibs walk would be going past and I'd be shouting, where do you want to walk our streets for? He's on the British. He's on the British way, he's on to walk the British streets for? British highway, fuck off. Go back to Dublin and walk the Dublin streets, that's not a British highway. I was terrible. See now, I've went to college, I've done my community development, and I'm embarrassed with the way I used to be now.
it's always been uncomfortable. Like I said, it's not something that has been positive in any way for me. Public transport, anything, it's just something that I would rather avoid on those days going out. Even if I'm like at work, I tend to try and find out beforehand, is there a match on that day? Do I need to get home? Do I need to be asked to be picked up, sort of thing? So for me, sectarianism in my area growing up has just been a negative thing for someone like me from a Pakistani background.
Sad. A bit angry that, you know, it's not moved on from when I was a young girl. If anything, I don't have it at home. I've married a Protestant, which you would say is a mixed marriage, which is ridiculous because he's Protestant, I'm Catholic. In Scotland, the west of Scotland, is classed as a mixed marriage. And my children have been brought up Catholics, and I've got friends that are Protestants, Catholics, so we don't have anything within our immediate family unit even now, but I see it outside. I see it outside. You know, I stay out at Eaglesham and they've got two massive big churches and the chapel's hidden round the back. You can't see it, you've got to go up a wee lane to find it. And when I moved there, I was told that it was a real area for like the Masons and Orange Lodge and all that, which is really quite strange. And also to go back to when at the Ibrox, when I was working down there, we had the Orange Lodge and we had the Eastern Star, who were the ladies, and they weren't, it was a secret. You weren't allowed to know anything about it. And because I did flowers, I used to have to do flowers for them in the shape of the Eastern Star, you know, but I didn't know what it was about. So we did, it wasn't only just the men, it was also the ladies who were, you know, just as, I would say, as bitter as the men. But it was a secret society, you weren't to know anything about it.
If it happens in public spaces, then it's frightening and you just want to get out and go as far away as possible. The last time I noticed some sectarianism was at the end of the referendum, which there was people connected to the Orange Lodges in George Square, and they were seemingly doing Nazi salutes, or I think the TV was trying to be diplomatic when they said it was either Nazi salutes or the Red Hand of Ulster. But nevertheless, there was violence. There were people getting shouted at and racist abuse, and you know. It looked pretty nasty, and I found that really disturbing. I just saw it on TV and on Twitter and so on, but it was very upsetting to see, you know, and to know that was happening.
I see it outside. I see it with everything. I see it all over the world. Sectarianism. And it's not just Catholics and Protestants, it's every religion, which I find really sad.
You can't say things hadn't moved on immensely since my grandparents' day. There were no signs proclaiming no Catholics hanging outside the shipyard gates. There wasn't the parish and poverty, the burden of endless pregnancies, or the shame. We still had the songs and the sayings, the anger and the spite. But the homicidal whispers of divide and conquer issued from a mouth that was toothless and had lost all its bite by the time we were all grown, and might yet be the only good dead thing I'll ever have known. I said at the end of that piece that I wrote that I think it's dying. I do think it's dying, and I think it's in its sort of death throes at the moment, but they're quite powerful death throes. I think some of the footage that we saw in Georgia, I think the west of Scotland's always been maybe the worst place in Scotland for sectarianism, because there's more of a mix there. There's a lot of people from, you know, sort of Irish Catholic origins, and that's always been kind of looked down upon. You know, lived in poverty, weren't hardworking, you know, and maybe had a bit of trouble, you know, getting into certain jobs and things like that. But I do think it's kind of, well, obviously equalities legislation has led to a lot of, you know, dampening down. I think Rangers relegation, disaster though it was for some people, has, you know, put paid to old firm games. So you don't get that, you know, you don't get that kind of crackle in the air and that worry that you know, you don't want, you know, maybe I would maybe say to my son in the past, don't wear that top out, you know, something bright green, or, you know, that showed, you know, he was a Celtic supporter. And I think the footage that we saw after the independence referendum of the sort of loyalist brigades, you know, showed the very ugly side of sort of that kind of orange form of Protestantism that thinks it's sort of superior, it thinks it's got claim to the country, and has a form of superiority. And I think a lot of that's disappearing. I think people are kind of accepting people on a more kind of equal footing. But it'll still maybe take 20 years before it'll be another generation before maybe kids don't notice it.
I do feel a lot more could be done, and that's why I think it's great that the library has opened it up, because not many people want to talk about it. You know, it's like a keep it down, don't talk about it. Only bring it out when an Orange Walk starts or something comes on, but keep it down, which I think it should be addressed, and I love the way the library are doing it.
It is different. I mean, obviously women don't confront each other over differences in the way that men do. You know, there's not, well, not all the time anyway, there's not the same kind of physicality about it, you know. I think between boys and between men, it can often lead to sort of physical fights and you know, extreme forms of violence. I think with women, if women experienced extreme forms of violence through sectarianism, it was usually through their husband or their partner.
Being a woman, and being, I think I'm a fairly strong woman, but I did come across a walk when I was with my daughter. It was 2 years ago, and both of us felt really intimidated, quite violated. You know, they'd entered our space where we're going about, and we couldn't get to where we were going because of this walk. And rather than be feisty and say, I'm not letting, we decided just to move away and get out of the situation in case we get caught up in anything. And then I said to myself, what colours am I wearing? Which I never think about, because I was caught up in this. And I've also had another incident being a woman, and I was at a demonstration, and it just so happened, it was just a couple of months ago, there was actually an Orange Walk on that day, and standing in the crowd, and the people from the Orange Walk were shouting abuse and things like that at the demonstrators, and I had a flag, and my husband said he was going somewhere else, and he said to me, roll the flag up. I'm like, no, but roll the flag up. And I thought, gosh, he's right, because I was myself walking down the city centre, and I was really aware that this flag might have caused some bother from men and women to me as a woman. So yes, I do think that you start to feel a wee bit vulnerable. Even though you're a strong woman, you do start to feel it. Well, you take yourself out of the situation before anything can happen, because things have happened in the past.
I don't know if it's an indirect way that women experience some forms of sectarianism, but it's less kind of out there, I think, than the way men experience it. We're probably less vocal about it.
For women, I think it is different. The responsibility on, they have family responsibilities, so for myself, it's your mum has to go out beforehand and do the shopping just to make sure she's not walking through the crowds on that day. So I do think it is different for women, because they do need to think and arrange their whole day beforehand. So can our kids go out? I've even spoke to local people, like women that I work with, and they've said the same thing, you know, we just avoid, they think it's normal, they avoid like sending their kids out, but they need to understand that it's not a positive thing, it's not something they should be doing. They shouldn't be sacrificing their child's playtime just because there's a match on. And I think women feel it more than men, because obviously women, especially from a Pakistani background or any other religious background, they wear the headscarf, they tend to think they're more targets than a normal white woman. So I think it is quite a negative experience.
Through marriage as well, I mean, my mum calls my sister's marriage a mixed marriage. They're both Christian, but he's from a Protestant family, and I don't think there's anywhere else in the world it would be called a mixed marriage. And probably through their children as well, women experience it. You know, if they're choosing a school, they maybe, I don't know, quite a few people I know that were brought up Catholic, and myself as well, I sent my kids to a non-denominational school. But I don't know how successful it was, especially for my daughter, because it turned out to be a very churchy non-denominational school, and we were trying to avoid that. You know, we were trying to avoid all that kind of, well, you know, why do you go to church? Because my husband and I, well, my husband at the time and I were not religious, and didn't sort of, I think we were trying to kind of even out the sort of divisory stuff.
You jump on a train, subway, underground, I've had negative experiences there, buses, they're drunk. It's just, you know, avoid that sort of thing.
I think in the west of Scotland we're still a bit kind of backward with, you know, regard to how women, you know, how we perceive women in a lot of ways. You know, it's still sort of, well, you know, women take care of family stuff, women stay in the background, you know.
It doesn't stop at being a Catholic, a Protestant, or you're Jewish, or you're Muslim, or your colour. It's everything. It's such a big, wide... But people think when you talk about sectarianism, you only mean Catholics and Protestants. They don't realise it's race. It comes into it, and it's, as you say, gay, and as you say, the colour of your skin, and also Islamophobia. It's getting worse, I feel, with it. And the media don't help any. The media can be really, can actually, people that maybe don't go on social media and just read papers and the news can be very frightened. And they can be frightened of like other things outside sectarianism, which they can only read it in these papers and only watch it on the news, and they don't have a computer, they're not on social media, so they don't get the right story, or it's actually a tool that these are using to make people frightened, which brings out sectarianism even worse.
In most of my experience, yeah, it's part of a whole kind of spectrum of kind of fears of the unknown, or, you know, dislike of things that aren't what you think you should be experiencing. I think it's quite a reactionary. I think it's part of a whole group of sort of reactionary behaviours and a fear of change, maybe.
The politics of the right basically they're not only anti-Irish, they are also, you know, homophobic and anti-gay and anti-black people and anti-the other even.
That's the kind of abuse we'll get. It will be racial hatred. It will come out when they're drunk and they see you automatically. You know they're going to say something to you just because you're Pakistani or you're an Indian or something. So that's, yeah.
It can be done outside the home, because I don't have any issues at home, but I'd like to help people outside the home. Although I don't feel, apart from, I did feel quite a bit when the referendum came up, and it was, I felt as if it was going back to that old Catholic Protestant nonsense again. You know, the people that were voting yes were predominant Catholics and the Unionists, which was untrue, but you had that minority who jumped on it and who loved it and used it as a veil, I feel, to get their point across that it's Queen, it's no voters. So women could have done a lot with that as well. Yeah, I think women can do a lot, but it depends. They might go back to the home and they might not have the support at home, and they might get punished at home for voicing it, because a lot of women do get sectarianism and do feel it through football as well. It's not just football, but football's got a big part in it for some women. You know, their team gets beat, the husband comes home and he takes it out on his wife and his children. So therefore they just keep quiet, they don't want to talk about it. And maybe they're frightened to talk about it outside the home for repercussions.
What the Women's Library's done is good, and I think that kind of thing could be built on, like the creative writing and so on. But I think as well, if women are visible, doing things together collectively in unity, you know, with Protestants and Catholics, but not only Protestants and Catholics, with, you know, black women, white women, disabled women, gay women, straight women, etc. And are seen to be showing that we're doing all of this in unity, and we don't feel any hatred or animosity, and this is how we would like society to be, then I think that's a good way of challenging sectarianism, you know, especially maybe to do that in places where sectarianism might happen.
Don't get me wrong, if these people want to demonstrate and women want to go, and it's in a friendly way, but it doesn't end up in a friendly way. It ends up when they start walking, there's a bitterness there. And women could do, I think women could do a bit more, because they're a big influence on their children. And some women are a big influence on their men, although their men might not think that.
I don't think a lot of effort gets put in when it comes to tackling issues when it's in regards to women, especially sectarianism. You just tend to think, okay, well, let's focus on the men and see how we can deal with that. But there's a lot more, like when I was looking into it, how they suffer domestic abuse on the day. It's not just people from different multicultural backgrounds or religious backgrounds. I think overall women are affected. So yeah, the focus has to be like put in more funding, make it more aware, like we can tackle this together as women, like we'd come together and think of ideas, how we could help each other. It's not just certain groups, it's everyone needs to come together, especially women, and learn how to deal with these sort of issues before it does something serious happens.
I expect it's the same kind of barriers that women experience about challenging anything, which is, you know, lack of confidence, lack of maybe knowing where to go and challenge, who to speak to, what to do, lack of having a voice.
Men won't listen. Men think they're the ones that can solve it. They're mainly the ones that have caused it. But they think they can solve it, and they think, like football for instance, men think, I mean even women that play football don't get the same platform that men get. Not at all. You know, the money that men make out, and it is money making, and that they like the sectarianism because it keeps the money rolling in. And women, they think that women can't deal with that. Of course women could deal with it. Look, of course women could do more. But it's just getting past the suits, as I call them.
I think sometimes we're just a bit kind of maybe caught up in our day-to-day lives. I think, I'm not saying women have got more, well, women have got more going on in their day-to-day lives, you know. Women do the childcare, they usually work as well, they've got a house. And yeah, I think here in the west of Scotland, things maybe haven't even moved on an awful lot for women in terms of sort of housework and childcare, even though we all go out and work, you know, a lot of it's full time. So maybe we don't have time to kind of think about these things as much. And we don't have the same social structures as men, where we maybe all gather in a crowd in the same place as much as men do. So it's maybe women need a space or an environment to talk about it more.
With the social media like Twitter and Facebook and these things, make it really bad, especially for women, because a lot of hate can come across. And it goes right across. It's not just where you're Catholic, it's your sexuality is everything. And women can feel pretty vulnerable. And I think computer and social media and all these things can even make the men say things that they wouldn't normally do. And how does a woman hit back? I mean, I've seen things and you're tempted to get back to them and say, this is ridiculous, but you're frightened of the backlash that you might get.
I try and avoid getting into arguments and conflict, but I know of other people that do get into arguments and conflict, and sometimes it is around sectarianism. So I you know, deliberately steer away. If I see an argument going on, I deliberately don't participate because I just don't like where it might end up.
Yeah, I think there's that sense that women are slightly lesser beings and shouldn't be sort of sticking their neck out about anything, and it's sort of challenging that perception in the first place that I think is quite difficult, especially if it's sort of, you know, quite a fierce looking group of, you know, men that you're trying to challenge. They're not going to take you seriously for a start. So the best kind of outcome may be that, you know, they'll laugh at you and maybe you'll end up having a bit of a laugh with them, and you might, some of your points might get through and make them think. But I think the worst case scenario for a woman is that it could become violent and abusive. So I don't know. I think it's hard to know where to begin. I think it probably needs a group of women to address it rather than just one woman standing up and saying, you know, this is wrong or whatever.
I don't think it will be solved in Scotland until it's solved in Ireland, because it's so interconnected, and most of the sectarian attitudes, that's where they have their root, in Ireland rather than Scotland, although it does, you know, it does permeate here.
Well, to give women more opportunities, more places like the Glasgow Women's Library, a women's space, bringing a woman in and telling her, don't be frightened. You've got a voice, it's a good voice. People will listen to you. Men will actually listen to you. There's a lot of men out there that are feminists, and they will listen to you, but some, you know, I feel women need to be pushed a bit more, and you're not just there to be the housewife and the mother and looking after a man. You've got a massive big role to play, and a lot of women do, but women need more encouragement to find their voice and to know that their voice is really powerful.
Watching the Northern Irish Parliament, most of the unionist parties, they just don't want to give up their power, and that's their problem. They've had power for a long time and they don't want to give it up. And so they're very angry and hateful, and they block things an awful lot. Whereas stuff that's progressive that goes on, it seems to be sort of in pockets here and there, but few and far between. And so there's you know, asking people to give up their power, that's always difficult in life. But that's what's going to be needed, I think.
Oh, I would love to see a future Scotland without sectarianism. Everybody living and embracing each other's religion, and embracing all the ethnic minorities that are coming in here, working together to make Scotland wonderful, to be a platform for the rest of the United Kingdom and the world to see that Scotland embraces everybody, has tolerance for everything and everyone.
If it's dealt with now, I think people can live a happier, much safer life and not have to sacrifice normal time going out on the streets. So I think it would be a more positive vibe where people are mixing without having that fear of having to go out. So yeah, if things are starting to change now, maybe we could change things in the future. Maybe we won't have to think beforehand, if there's a match on, don't go out. So I'd rather it gets tackled now so the future generations don't have to go through the same things that we've been through.
I think you you know, when I was growing up, and you started to see the sort of differences, you know, as the world got a bit bigger and you went out to work and met different groups of people and you know, different, I mean, mainly Protestant or Catholic, it was the west of Scotland, people from, you know, sort of different religions, you sort of realised that the differences weren't as big as maybe you had imagined when you were younger. And then, you know, you get older again, maybe have your experiences broaden and you meet people from lots of different walks of life, lots of different sort of ethnic and religious backgrounds, and you learn a bit more about people. And I think a Scotland that was open to, you know, the differences in people, rather than holding on to this sort of homogenous, you know, this idea that we're some sort of homogenous ethnic group or religious group, is a Scotland that sort of embraces a whole different future.
Women have a voice, especially women in Scotland, and it's not in the history books all the time. So let's, women in Scotland, come out, talk more, do more for Scotland, and I think Scotland would be a great place.